I don't give a damn about my reputation. You're living in the past. It's a new generation. A girl can do what she wants to do, and that's what I'm gonna do. And I don't give a damn about my bad reputation. That is Bad Reputation by the great Joan Jett, released in 1980 as an anthem for new girls in a new decade. But you know, had the song been released 60 years earlier, it would have been just as appropriate for and just as embraced by another kind of new woman. A convention-flouting, cigarette-smoking, bob-wearing, Model T driving, boy-kissing, cocktail-drinking, Charleston-dancing menace, known in the contemporary vernacular and remembered by history as a flapper. And I'll tell you all about it on the other side. Hello, you're listening to the John Huff Podcast. Oh, yay. A girl can do what she wants to do, and that's what I'm gonna do. That sums it up, kids. That sums up the flapper ethos, okay? Now, I know you can picture it. I know you can search back through old grainy black and white photos, silent films, and you can picture what a flapper looked like. But what was it all about? And who were these people? Okay, the flappers, the flapper craze, the flapper fad, as they call it, was brought about by young women, late teens, early 20s, who came of age in the years following the First World War, okay? These are young people who came online in a world that was much, much different from the world in which their mothers came online, certainly their grandmothers came online, and in some cases even different from the world that their older siblings came online in. All right, these are the years following the First World War. Now, I don't need to tell you, if you have read any history, if you have listened to my program, the First World War was one of those seismic events that ended worlds literally and figuratively, okay? We are experiencing something similar right now. Perhaps not on the same scale, but we live now in what may be remembered in time as the post-COVID world. There was a world before COVID. There is a world after COVID. These are markers in time. The First World War was a big old marker in time, okay? The world that emerged after it was utterly different from the world that came before it. And into this world, or as a product of this world, came the flappers. A girl can do what she wants to do, and that's what I'm going to do. This was also articulated by the modern poet Robert Hazard, who wrote, "Girls just want to have fun." You didn't know that was a cover, did you? Well, it is. Also articulated by a band of philosophers called Trooper, who said, "We're here for a good time, not a long time." These are the fundamental principles, along with Joan Jett's other line, which is, "You're living in the past, it's a new generation." Man, if only Pepsi was there to jump on this marketing. The First World War changed worlds, okay? And these young people, these young women, the whole flapper thing, in my mind, is the product of a perfect societal and social storm, okay? But it all finds its roots in the First World War, okay? Because this event, this seismic event in history, changed everything in so many ways. And in so many ways, it informs and it lays the groundwork for this flapper movement to arise in the 1920s. Okay, now the fundamental ethos, as I have said, is girls just want to have fun. Where does this come from? All right, take a look at what we've just gone through. All right, the years 1914 to 18 are a carnage and a slaughter on unprecedented levels, an experience of horror that we cannot even imagine. And they send a very clear message to the youth of the day, which is life is short, man. Life could be short, man. And then you get these girls, these young kids, boys too, looking around saying, holy crap, man, 20 million people just died in this conflict. And then immediately following the conflict comes along the Spanish flu. Now, upwards of 20 million people were killed in the First World War. The Spanish flu will come along in 1919, 1920 and kill twice as many people as that. Some estimates for the Spanish flu put the death toll at 100 million. The conventional wisdom says anywhere from 20 to 50 million, probably erring on the high side of that. So you've just gone through this experience, 1914 to say 1920, wherein upwards of 60 million people have died through circumstances well beyond their control. And you're a kid and you're looking around thinking, dude, life is short. We got to suck the marrow, man. We need to have as much freaking fun as possible. And there's that line that Joan Jett sings about you're living in the past, it's a new generation. This was also something very top of mind for the Flappers, okay? What was past is not cool, man. Now every freaking teenager has thought that. This is not a new thing, but it takes on a particular poignancy in the shadow of the First World War. Consider yourself a young person, 18, 19 years old. It's 1920, all right? And you have been brought up as a child, and generations before you have been brought up to believe that we have reached a kind of pinnacle of civilization, okay, in Europe and in North America, in what we collectively know as the West, all right? We have the fundamental belief in our institutions. We believe in the church. We believe in the government. We believe in democracy. We believe in capitalism. If you are from a certain tradition, you believe in the king, the monarch, the empire. All of these traditional things have yielded to us through the Victorian into the Edwardian age, this pinnacle of civilization, how civilized we are. And the arrogance should have been recognized in 1912 when the largest thing ever built by the hand of man hit an iceberg and sank on its maiden voyage. That was the warning shot, kids. Pride goeth before a fall. And so if you're a kid in that time period, what does your church, your government, your monarchy, your political system, your economic system, what does all of your philosophy that forms the underpinning of your magnificent civilization, what does it yield to you? It yields to you a war of unprecedented scale, carnage, horror, in which 20 million people die. Now, if you are a kid who's paying attention and you take a look around at that, and everywhere you go in England, in Scotland, in France, in Germany, in Canada, in Australia, in Austria, in Russia, in Italy, in Serbia, everywhere you look, you see the evidence of this war. Not just if you happen to have been born and raised in Ypres, Belgium, which is now a rubble, or Passchendaele, or Arras, or any of those places that were the front line, at least in the West. Take a look around, and everywhere you look, you see a dude with an arm missing, or two arms missing, or a hole blown in his freaking face, or a leg off, or on crutches, or stuck away in an asylum somewhere because he can no longer function. you see the evidence everywhere that the product of those institutions that you were brought up to believe were so progressive and infallible is a heinous global catastrophe. And do you begin at that point to question whether you ought to have so much faith in those institutions and in those ways and in the beliefs that support them? The flappers look around and they're like, A, old men could decide our fate at any moment. Right? At any moment. They could send the boys off to war. They could conscript us. And even if they don't, some heinous virus is going to come on and wipe us all out indiscriminately. We're here for a good time, not a long time. Man, it can all change in an instant. And we better start having a good time while we can. And then there was this traditional notion, that a woman, her job is to find a freaking husband. Well, put yourself in England or France or Germany, any of these places in around 1920, and finding a husband is a somewhat different proposition than it used to be, man, because, in Britain, 800,000 are dead. Over 1 million French boys, over 1 million German boys are dead. Russians by the hundreds of thousands are gone. Not the same as it used to be, man. This is a sea change in this concept of going out and finding yourself a husband, man. The war has taken that away. The war has taken away your faith in institutions. The war has taught you that life is freaking short, man. And we got to jump on it while we can. Now, something else has happened, all right, that will fuel, a couple of things have happened that will fuel, can I say that again? The kind of lifestyle and movement, all right? So when the war is on, all the boys have gone to the front. Somebody got to work the factories, man. Somebody has got to make the hundreds of millions of shells and weapons that we need to conduct this freaking war. Who's going to do it? The able-bodied men have been sent off to the front in increasingly lower ages, by the way, as time goes on. Women come into the factories to take over those freaking jobs. So women begin to be household earners. Women began to understand themselves as economically viable in a way that they weren't before. This was not the tradition, man. It's like, wait a minute, we're going to work the jobs. We can do this stuff. We can do what the men were doing. And we're getting paid, man. And we like having this disposable income. And this becomes the way that these people who would become the flappers begin to think. And they got jobs. They are in the economy. They've got jobs. They've got a certain degree of independence. They got money to spend, man. Where are you going to spend your money if you are a wild, young, hot to Trotsky young thing out there making the scene? Well, you're going to go to the speakeasy, man. Especially in America. Also in Canada, Prohibition was in full effect, all right? The sale, the production of alcohol, not legal, not allowed. And what's the first thing we do when things are illegal is we push them underground. And that's what happened. That's what happened. The speakeasies came into effect, right? People started building these clandestine, off-the-grid underground clubs flowing with freaking alcohol and that devil jazz music. And that is where these kids with the disposable income and the chips on their shoulder and this rebellion against the old way, that's what we're going to do. Because look, here's the tradition. There was this concept called the Gibson girl. The Gibson girl was defined as, this is like 1890s, this concept of the Gibson girl comes along. And this is the definition of beauty and posture, and this is how a young girl should be, all right? The Gibson girl with her long hair piled up on top of her head, right? She is tall. She is demure. She wears a corset. You know what I mean? She is slender. She is calm. She is tranquil. And this was held up, these illustrations, by a cat called Charles Gibson. Of course, it's a man who's defining the ideal ultimate feminine beauty and grace. And for many, many happy years, the Gibson girl was held up as what you were supposed to strive for, all right? This was the picture of beauty. This was the picture of femininity. This was the ideal. Now, I want you to picture what a flapper is. Picture a flapper against the Gibson girl with her corsets and her hair piled up on top of her head, being very demure and quiet. The flapper is the polar fundamental opposite. Flapper said, that old way sucks, and we're not having anything to do with the old ways, all right? No more corsets for us. No more hourglass figure. No more body defining. No more shape defining. Tight clothes and corsets, etc. Look at the flapper dress, all right? Flappers came along, and they're like, we're chucking all this stuff. We're wearing lingerie that's comfortable and you can move in, like knee-length skirts, very shapeless kind of frock kind of dresses. Very, actually, boyish looking, all right? The Gibson girl with the corset, hourglass figure, feminine, shapely. Look at the flappers. Straight lines, all right? Knee length. Now we're getting a little bit risque. We're showing off some calf. We're showing off some ankle. Maybe even a slightly plunging neckline. Show a bit of shoulders, all right? We are being provocative in that sense, but we are not being feminine in the same way. The flapper girl's clothes were very almost androgynous. They were shapeless and light, easy to move in, easy to dance in, kids. And that hair piled on top of your head, that long, luxurious hair. The bob. Flappers introduced the bob, that kind of short hairstyle, also a little bit boyish. And they put a big bucket hat on their heads. You got this long dress, knee length, shapeless, bucket on your head, short hair. This is a direct sneer across the lines of history at this traditional model of femininity with the long hair and the corsets and the bosoms and all that stuff. They hid all that. And they were not elegant. We are not elegant, kids. We like to dance. We are hellraisers. The flappers were hellraisers. We are here to have a good time, and we do not care about your traditional roles. We do not care about your traditional values. We do not care about your traditional morals, because we're not being subjugated anymore. Off with the corsets. Off with that restriction. Off with this BS. We got our own money now. We have a foot in the door. In 1920, women were given the vote in America after a long and difficult battle. The suffragettes marching, fighting for women's rights, fighting for the vote, fighting for equal representation in society. And I'll tell you a secret, kids. You know, the generation after them was the flappers. And a lot of those suffragettes didn't dig the flappers so much, man. Did not dig on them because they had had a long and a serious fight for equality. And along come these frivolous dancing girls with their freaking cigarettes and their speakeasies and their jazz music and their cocktails and their Model T Ford cars that they're driving around, making a mockery of the fight, the serious fight that we've had. These vain, vapid, empty, stupid young girls dancing the Charleston. There was a real conflict between what feminism was and what the model of feminism seemed to be. But it was all a break with tradition. All right, you see that in the flapper clothes. You see that in these girls going out to the speakeasies to dance the jazz with black jazz musicians playing in the clubs in these speakeasies, drinking illegally underground. This was not heard of. This was not acceptable feminine behavior, okay? This comes out of the 20s, and this rejection of the tradition, this sense that life could end at any freaking moment, and this idea that we have our own money now, man. We can spend it however we want. And these people began to really value clothing, fashion, it really rises up here, because what happens the first time you identify a group of people who have disposable income? In any society anywhere that's capitalist, the first thing you do is start finding products to market to them and start marketing for all you're worth. And that's what happened. All right, the notion of a flapper, the etymology of the word flapper is in much dispute. All right, where did this come from? We're not sure. There is a school of thought that says a flapper referred to, like 200 years ago in England, a prostitute. Or it goes back to this Gibson thing again, right? So when a girl reaches a certain age of maturity, she comes out, quote unquote, into society. And that's when she starts piling the hair on her head, and that's when she starts wearing the corsets. But previous to that, you're just a young kid, right? Seen and not heard. And you don't pile your hair up on your head, you wear it down in like a ponytail. And when you run around like a headless freaking maniac chicken, like little girls do, your hair flaps against your back. So they call these little kids flappers, maybe, because their hair's banging off their back as they run around. And then some people say, well, no, it's just like little baby birds, how they flap their skinny arms. That's like a little girl, you know? Or they added it later when they talked about these girls and their wild Charleston dances in the Black Bottom, where they're moving their arms in weird ways and kicking their legs, flapping about, flapping and flitting. In any case, it's a derogatory kind of thing about little girls being frivolous and silly and flapping about. Until they become a Gibson girl when they're old enough to put their hair on their head and wrap themselves in a freaking corset, right? The term does not come into the popular vernacular really until about 1920, when there is a movie called, it will not surprise you to hear, The Flapper. The Flapper stars a silent movie icon called Olive Thomas in the character of Ginger King. All right, Ginger King is a young girl, headstrong, willful, frivolous, who comes from, a respectable family, and she makes the earth-shattering, heinous decision one day to have a soda pop unchaperoned with a boy. Dun, dun, dun. And for that, she is sent off to boarding school. And hijinks ensue. All right, this is 1920, and that was the flapper. And so anyone and the movement and the fad that became associated with this kind of immoral, amoral behavior, hanging out with boys, became part of the flapper culture, right? And this was a big, big thing, all right? Again, there weren't a lot of freaking boys around in some of these countries, you know what I mean? And so it was always the tradition that you probably had, you had a marriage arranged for you, or, you were courted by a boy in the presence of a chaperone or your parents or whatever. And the flappers just said, the hell with that, man. I like that boy. Let's go talk to him. It's very teenage, very modern teenager. It begins here with the flappers, and this was scandalous. The girl in the movie gets sent off to boarding school for having a soda pop unchaperoned with a boy. It was not done, and therefore the flappers made it the only thing they do. Somehow, they get their hands on a Model T, and they drive down to the speakeasy, and they drink cocktails and smoke cigarettes and dance these wild flailing dances like the Charleston, and they flirt hard with boys, and there were even rumors of something called a petting party. A petting party where couples got together and, hugged each other and that kind of thing. Scandalous behavior. Why? Because it goes against the traditions. All right, it goes against the social mores because we can. And the jazz age happens because we can start making records and there's radio and this music appealed to the kids, right? It was all about this wild, frivolous time that they were having after the horrendous awfulness of the war that broke down everything. They call it the roaring freaking 20s because that's what it was, at least in public memory, popular memory. It is romanticized as this time of the Charleston and speakeasies, and the girls just want to have fun, man. So what happens? You see this group of people, they have money, they're having a good time, and immediately the fashion begins to spring up, all right? Now, the fashion had a certain political bent, but again, marketers are going to jump on any population that has disposable income, right? And so you get like Flapper magazine, and you get Coco Chanel, and you get people designing clothes that are these straight cuts and make it so you can dance in them. Unlike a freaking corset, we're not doing ballroom anymore. We're doing the freaking Charleston. Have you seen the Charleston? The Charleston is wild, all right? It's legs kicking. It is arms flailing. This was not polite, civilized behavior. But as we've already established, whatever was civilized results in the most heinously uncivilized thing of all. So we're not doing that. We're going out and kicking up our heels, kids, because life is short and we're here for a good time. And so this flapper culture gets very wrapped up in consumerism, all right? We want these clothes. We're going to buy these clothes. We like these cars. We like these cigarettes. It becomes this weird fashion movement, and it becomes this consumer movement. And again, the original suffragettes and the traditional people who had gone through this struggle, a genuine and difficult struggle to achieve representation and legitimacy as women, look at these consumerist, vain, vapid little girls, and it drives them freaking mad. And this is happening everywhere, okay? There are flappers in France. There are flappers in England. There are flappers in Canada. This is another example of what they called the lost generation. You heard of the lost generation? You hear that. This is the people, again, the people 1920s on, the people who either survived the war or came up in its ruin. You think of the lost generation, you think, well, they're talking about all the people who got killed in the war. That is a lost generation. But when they talk about the lost generation, they're talking about the people who came after, the people who no longer believed in anything, the people who saw the transience of life, the fragility of life, and no longer believed in anything. And so you get Gatsby, and you get Hemingway, you get F. Scott Fitzgerald, you get, the jazz age. These people just blowing their brains out, man. These people just living it up and drinking too much and probably dealing with the collective trauma in a way that maybe we don't even understand. One of the things I've thought is that the real ramification of COVID is a mental one, and we don't even know. We don't even know yet what the impact of that is going to be. Well, take the First World War. What is the collective mental impact of that? And the lost generation, they hung around in Paris, the writers, the artists, Gertrude Stein, Zelda Fitzgerald. We romanticize this now, but those were people living in some ways a bleak outlook on what life is now and what on earth do we believe in. You know what I mean? Flappers were a part of that too. It doesn't matter about tomorrow. We're just going to blow our brains out freaking tonight. And all of these different elements combined, And then there was a song for the Flappers too. I mentioned this a couple episodes. This all stems from a couple episodes ago. When I talked about 1927, Clara Bow, the movie It, from which we get the concept and the term, the It Girl, all right? Clara Bow was one of the big iconic stars of the 20s. She's a flapper icon, right? The It Girl. And there were songs. There was a song that I mentioned in that episode, and it's called Oh Say, Can I See You Tonight? Kind of the 1920s WAP. You know what I mean? And it again ties in to these flappers who are breaking with traditions, all right? The character in the flapper gets sent away to boarding school for having an unchaperoned Coke with a boy. Oh, Say, Can I See You Tonight? As I understand it, was originally recorded by a person called Ruth Gillette's. I have not been able to get my hands on this freaking tune, but I have a 1925 recording of it. It exists out there in the world by a cat called Billy Murray and his orchestra. And the whole freaking song, the premise is this, right? You got a 17-year-old girl. Her folks are going away for the night, and she's calling up her boyfriend to say, "Oh, say, can I see you tonight?" She's inviting her boyfriend over for, hugging and stuff. This is a popular song on the radio, okay? This is bad reputation for the flapper era. Hey, I'm inviting you over because my folks are away. Nudge, nudge, wink, wink. This became part of the popular consciousness. What a freaking scandal. What a scandal. These girls who are having petting parties, who are flirting openly with boys, who are drinking cocktails illegally during Prohibition, and dancing the Charleston to jazz music. Because why not? Because we have money now, because life is short and meaningless, and because girls just want to have fun. And all the shackles you've put on us, exemplified by that corset we refuse to wear anymore, we are throwing them off. All right? We are young, wild, and free. We're here for a good time, not a freaking long time. And then you do get the it girl and Clara Bow. And what happens is, the marketing happens, this consumer culture thing kicks in, they make a lot of money off the flappers, selling them hats and clothes and cosmetics. My goodness, the cosmetics. That was another thing. God, you can't tell from the photos, right? They're all black and white. Can't tell from the old newsreels or the silent movies. Rouge and the eye makeup and the lipstick, like they painted themselves up, these flappers. And so you could sell a lot of cosmetics to those kids, man. And that's what they did. The industry just jumps in. We're going to sell everything we got. And so, a whole culture rises up around that. That's the magazines, that's the products, that's whatever. And then it becomes a mass market movement. And then all the kids are on board. You know what I mean? It's the cool thing now to be a flapper, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And, just like every other generation, partly it was to horrify their parents. I mean, there was that teenage element to it. There's deeper stuff, if you put it in context. But it's all about horrifying your parents, and parents were horrified. Just like our parents were horrified when we brought home a Poison record. Or whatever parents are horrified by now, social media stuff, whatever the kids are into. This is a story as old as time. And that's the flapper ethos, man. Horrified, frightened people because, the older folks had been through this too. The older folks had seen what the product of your institutions can be, what the product of the things you believe in can be. And they're shaking too. All right. They have recognized that a world has freaking changed. I mean, you look at England after the war, Downton Abbey. Can you draw a line to Downton Abbey and the sort of blurring of the lines after the war between aristocracy and the serfs? You know what I mean? A lot of the conventions began to be torn freaking down. And you've got, in some cases, a nihilistic population of war veterans who have seen stuff ain't nobody should ever see. And not just once, thousands of times probably. If they survived, get this whole generation of people who survived that coming back saying, what on earth do we believe in now? What we believed in before is collapsing, and we saw it with our own freaking eyes. And we don't know what to do now. And some of them have got PTSD, and some of them have got arms off, And young wives and mothers have lost their freaking husbands and fathers and brothers and uncles. The whole system is crashing down for the older folks too. And it's hard enough to hold it together in the face of all that. Now look at our crazy kids, for crying out loud. Look what our daughters are doing. They're necking with boys and dancing the Charleston and wearing bucket hats. What do we do with that? There is a lot of collective crisis, I think, happening socially. What is this jazz music? Ain't nobody doing, the ballroom dance anymore. They're not wearing their hair up on their heads, and they got rouge on. This is a chaos. This is a social and societal chaos. And for me now, it's really fun to look at this. You know how I romanticize and I glamorize and I long for and I get nostalgic about eras that I did not experience. And I watch this now with great fascination. This whole flapper thing that started not really as it's kind of in a weird way, a political and an anti-political movement. It's like we're checking out. We're checking out from whatever you cats got going on, but we're doing it in a weird political kind of protesting way. And then it just gets taken over by the marketing biz, We're going to sell these people products and whatever, and we're going to build this kind of fad and craze, and they call it a fad now. We're going to have movies about it. We're going to have songs, and, we're going to have it girls and magazines, and we're just going to do this flapper thing while we can make a bunch of money off it. But the funny thing is, it's ultimately the money that killed the flappers. Oh yeah, kids, the roaring 20s. In the first half of that decade, man, we're riding high, especially in North America. Business is a booming. All right, France is devastated. We have to rebuild France. We have to rebuild Belgium. The English, Britain, has been making a point of kind of borrowing money from the States and stuff. Bit dicey, the British Empire is falling apart as a result of this war, It's happening because the British economy is ravaged, the workforce is ravaged, business is booming in North America. That's why it's the roaring 20s, man. People have got money, people are nihilistic, we're blowing our brains out. Towards the end of the decade, that begins to slow down a bit. And then, of course, the big one happens, October 29th, 1929, known to history as Black Tuesday, the stock market crash that overnight destroyed it all and ushered in the Great Depression. And you don't see a lot of flappers in the Great Depression, kids. Ain't got money to buy those clothes. Ain't got jobs. Life becomes very bleak and desperate indeed. And that's what killed the flappers. The money killed the flappers because the money killed everything. When the stock market crashed, again, it's another seismic event where there's before the crash and after the crash. And the only thing that pulls you out of the crash is another war. WW2. It's really interesting how history unfolds, man. But the flappers fascinate me. There's a painting, not a painting, there's an illustration. You want to take a look at what the kind of idealized flapper looked like, the Gibson girl version of a flapper. There was an illustrator called Russell Patterson, and he made this illustration that he called Where There's Smoke, There's Fire. And it's this beautiful, elegant, long, lithe flapper woman, skinny, in her flapper dress. Got her hat on, got a cigarette, and the smoke is just going all across the screen as I look at it on my computer. It's beautiful. It's such a provocative and evocative illustration. Where there's smoke, there's fire. And ain't that the message, man? These girls were smoking cigarettes. They were drinking cocktails. They had all this really great 20s slang, which I think we ought to bring back, And they had, "Oh, say, can I see you tonight?" And I find this whole period in history as an extension of the First World War, which is my historical hobby horse. The aftermath of that, really, really fascinating in the ways that our consumer culture and this kind of gender roles, traditions, the way things just crumble, and the way something that looks a lot more like the world we recognize springs up in the aftermath. You had pre-World War I and you had post-World War I. And what a rollicking freaking time it was. Speakeasies, jazz music, dancing. It was roaring, it was rollicking, and for all of those reasons. And again, I feel as though it's a perfect social and societal storm. And the implications, it reverberates We have people today who are, the ancestors were the Wappers. And the women's rights thing continues now. And in some ways, it's going backwards down south. But, you trace the origins to the Wappers and then the suffragettes who hated the Wappers. Really, really interesting dynamics and an interesting story. And I'm going to stop talking about it now because I'm not sure what else to say. The Wappers, fascinating, and hope you enjoyed. Now, before we go any further, and I'm not going to go a lot further, it's a good time to tell you that we have a Patreon page. This is the Patreon plug. Yes! Patreon.com/John Huff Podcast. If you are inclined to support the show, I have one tier of membership. It is $5 a month. And that's your way of saying, hey, man, I enjoy the program you're doing. It does take an enormous amount of work. It does cost me some money to do this. I do an episode like this. I almost need to take like a stress leave. The histories I want to get right and the histories I want to articulate well. And they make me kind of a basket case, Before I avoid sitting down to record them because it's intimidating to start somewhere and then talk about flappers for 40 minutes and try to make it interesting and engaging and correct mostly. I do call them superficial histories. Takes a lot out of me. And if you appreciate that, if you're entertained, if you're educated, if you were inspired, if you were informed by this podcast, whatever I'm doing, and you want to consider tipping me $1.25 for every episode, $5 a month on Patreon. And I do appreciate the support of the people who have done that so far. Thank you very much. You don't want to do Patreon, that's cool. The podcast will remain free and accessible where you enjoy fine podcasts, but you can help me out by following on the socials. John Huff Podcast on Instagram, John Huff Podcast on Facebook, John Huff Podcast on TikTok. Follow me, share the episodes. That helps enormously. Tell a friend. You're out at the speakeasy this weekend and, you're necking with some girl in her bucket hat. Tell her about the podcast. I'm sure she'd be interested in hearing about it. Leave me a rating and review if you can, please. I know. It takes 5 seconds to just jump onto Apple, leave a 5-star. It takes 30 seconds to write a little review that says, hey, I like this show and you might like it too. Check it out. It helps me against this algorithm. It helps me in this landscape that is so dominated now by celebrities and big media money, people who have resources that I just cannot match, man. But you can do me a little solid. You can sauce me a review. That's a cool thing to say. That's what the modern flappers say. 20 slang was amazing. Maybe I should do an episode about that. Please, if you can consider doing that, I would very much appreciate it. Again, it's patreon.com/John Huff Podcast. I do appreciate all of your support. Now, before we check out of here, one more little thing. Something scary happened. Something scary happened last weekend, kids. All right, I tuned in to the Austin City Limits. I like to watch Austin City Limits because I like to watch the drummers, man. You don't see a lot of live drummers in your day-to-day anymore. But you watch ACL, it's usually a band, usually a drummer. And what's interesting about ACL is that you get different vantage points on the drum set. All right, so there'll be like a camera kind of over the shoulder or beside the kit, and then you can see. You can see what the drummer's doing. You can see what the setup is, what gear he's got back there or she. And I really enjoy Austin City Limits for that. And I also uncover some really interesting music sometimes that way. So last weekend, the guest on Austin City Limits was Maren Morris, okay? Now, I knew going in that Maren Morris at least comes out of the country music scene, and that's kind of a no-fly zone for me, okay? It is not my bag. I'm not super duper into the country music, okay? Particularly the bro country music, but what I was pleased to discover about Maren Morris is that she ain't that. All right, she ain't the female equivalent of the bro country. So we don't get songs about blue jeans, and we don't get songs about dirt roads and tractors and a cold beer. We don't get any of that crap. Sorry, not crap. We don't get any of that particular artistic expression. And so Maren Morris comes out and she starts playing Crackerjack Band, killer players, right? Watching the drummer killer. She's playing the first song, and I'm like, wait a minute. I know this song. I've heard this song before. And I listened more and I'm like, I had to learn this song. What is it? And it's a tune called Circles Around This Town. I'm like, I know this song. I learned this song. Why did I learn this song? It would follow that I learned it for Lindsay, which is Lindsay and the Lonelies, which is the country flavored band that I play in. It's like, no, I don't think it's a Lindsay. It's not really her vibe. She's more cactus country. You know what I mean? Tex-Mex. Was it Kay? And it was. I texted Kay Howell and I'm like, did you make me learn this song, Circles Around This Town by Maren Morris? She's like, I don't know if I did or not, but I love that song. So yeah, it was Kay. So I learned this song and that instantly gives me a connection. It's like, I know this one. And she's really good. And it is not bro country. It's more of an Americana thing. It's more of a Brandi Carlile thing. I even got just little hints of Amanda Marshall along the way. I'm thinking of Birmingham, some of that stuff. Not the pop Amanda Marshall, but that more kind of roots Americana Amanda Marshall. Folk almost. And then after she did Circles Around This Town, Maren Morris did this tune called 80s Mercedes. And that just did it, man. 80s Mercedes by Maren Morris. I'm like, oh man, we got a problem here. Houston, we got a problem. Call Flapper Magazine. I like a country artist. Come on, man. You think you know a guy. But again, country only in a loose sense, all right? I think she writes her own tunes. They are not about blue jeans and a cold beer. Thank you. Thank you, Buddha, for that. And she's just really good, man. So, if you have not listened to Maren Morris, I recommend you check her out. Listen to 80s Mercedes. I'm going to put that on the John Huff podcast, referenced on the podcast 2023 playlist on Spotify. I haven't been talking a whole lot of music lately, so I haven't added a lot to that playlist. I'll put that on there. I will put a version of Oh Say Can I See You Tonight on there, so you can check that out. It'll be the Billy Murray version. And I don't know, maybe something else, but go check that out and check out Maren Morris, okay? If you have not listened to her, if you have, as I do, kind of a spasmodic reaction to the notion of listening to country music, check her out, man, because it's not what you might think it is. Really good songs, really good songs. 80s Mercedes is dynamite. The title track from her new record, which is Humble Quest, really, really good song, man. She's really, really good. Great singer, great stage presence, and not these sort of dumbass country songs. Really good. So check out Maren Morris, okay? And go look into Flappers. Really, really interesting stuff. I'm going to go. All right, we're sneaking up on the golden hour. I appreciate you listening. I appreciate your support. These 130 episodes. If you're desperate to have this episode in history this week, we go back to the year 1930 when Sue Johansson was born. Sex with Sue Johansson. Oh yeah, you listened to Sue Johansson. She was a big part of your adolescence, okay, kids? She was born in 1930. And a cat died in 1930 called Tom Norman. Why do you care about Tom Norman? Well, he was kind of the P.T. Barnum of England back in the 1800s, and he was the last person to manage and display publicly Joseph, not John, Joseph Merrick, a.k.a. the Elephant Man, the movie about whom traumatized the F out of me as a child, and I remain traumatized by it now. I was going to do maybe a Joseph Merrick Elephant Man episode, may or may not, but his last handler was Tom Norman. And he died in 1930. So there you go, this episode in history. I want to thank you for listening. I'm going to shutting up. And there ain't much else to say, kids, except, hey, I'll check you later. Yeah. I don't give a damn about my reputation. You living in the past, it's a new generation. A girl can do what she wants to do, and that's what I'm gonna do. And I don't give a damn about my bad reputation. Used to play that one with hearts. Oh yeah, baby. Whew.